Well, hi everybody. What's going on, fourth graders? Having a good day, I hope. We got a little rain. That was nice, wasn't it? Yeah. Welcome back to Island of the Blue Dolphins. Today we're going to read 16, 17, and 18. We're moving right along with this book. Yeah, we're going to be done here in a few days. I love it. I think it's super good. How you doing with your packet? You getting all that done? Did you write about a pet that you had? Yeah, I hope that was fun. I hope you get a chance to share those online with each other. That'd be fun. Let's see. Today, she got a dog. Remember the leader of the dog, and what'd she name it? Ron too. Yeah. So that was kind of cool. So today, all sorts of stuff's going to happen. One of the things you're going to write about though is, have you ever created or drawn or worked on a project or done something that you were really proud of? Write about that. I guess Karana's probably going to do some sort of a project today, maybe her house or something. How about you? You ever done something you were really proud of? I'm always working in the backyard on stuff, and I always have to make sure Mrs. Phillips comes out and looks at it, and I want her to be proud. Oh, look what I did, look what I did. And it's fun to do stuff, it makes you feel good. I think you like it better when you do it yourself. So have fun reading or writing about that, and I'll kind of go back for just a little bit to remind us where we were. She fought those sea elephants, or she was going to. She wanted a tusk from one, but it didn't happen. Luckily, though, two sea elephants ended up fighting, and one of them killed the other one. She went back later, and she got a tusk from the dead sea elephant's bones. And then she fought the dogs, and she shot an arrow right into the leader of the pack, and boom, got him. And then found him later with an arrow stuck in him, and I kind of thought she'd finish him off with a club or something, but she picked him up and took him home and pulled that arrow out and helped him get over his wound and fed him and gave him water. And over time now, it looks like he's going to live with her. And she said, I called out, "Dog, dog," for I had no other name for him. I ran toward the house calling it. He was inside. He was just getting to his feet, stretching himself and yawning. He looked at the fish I carried and then at me and moved his tail. That night I stayed in the house. Before I fell asleep, I thought of a name for him, for I could not call him Dog. The name I thought was Rantu, which means in our language, fox eyes. Chapter 16, Island of the Blue Dolphins by Scott Odell. The white men's ship did not return that spring or in the summer. But every day, whether I was on the headland or gathering shellfish on the rocks or working on my canoe, I watched for it. I also watched for the red ship of the Aleuts. I was not sure what I would do if the Aleuts came. I could hide in the cave, which I had stored with food and water, for it was surrounded by thick brush, and the mouth of the ravine could only be reached from the sea. The Aleuts had not used the spring and did not know about it because there was another one closer to where they had camped. But they might come upon the cave by chance, and then I must be ready to flee. For this reason, I worked on the canoe I had abandoned on the spit. I went to the place where the others were hidden, but they were dried out and cracked. Also, they were too heavy for a girl to push into the water, even a girl as strong as I was. The tides had almost buried the canoe, and I labored for many days to dig it out of the sand. Since the weather was warm, I did not go back and forth to my house on the headland, but I cooked my meals on the sand spit and at night slept in the canoe, which saved much time. Even this canoe was too big for me to pull easily in and out of the water, so I set about making it smaller. I did this by loosening all the planks and by cutting the sinews and heating the pitch that bound them together. I then made these planks to half their length using sharp knives made from a black stone, which is to be found at one place on the island, and bound them back together with fresh pitch and sinews. The canoe, when I had finished, was not so beautiful as it had been before, but I could now lift one end of it and drag it through the waves. All the time I was working on the canoe, which was most of that summer, Rantu was with me. He was either sleeping in the shade of the canoe or running up and down the sand spit chasing pelicans that roost there in great numbers, because there are numerous fish nearby. He never caught any of the birds, yet he would keep trying till his tongue hung out of his mouth. He had learned his name quickly and many words that meant something to him. Zalwit, for example, which is our word for pelican, and Nayip, which means fish. I talked to him often using these words and others, and many that he did not understand, just as though I was talking to one of my people. "Rontu," I would say after he had stolen the special fish I had speared for my supper, "tell me, why is it that you are such a handsome dog and yet such a thief?" He would put his head to one side and then the other, although he only knew 2 of the words, and looked at me. Or I'd say, "It is a beautiful day. I've never seen the ocean so calm, and the sky looks like a blue shell. How long do you think these days will last?" Rontu would look up at me just the same, although he understood none of the words, acting as if he did. Because of this, I was not so lonely. I did not know how lonely I had been until I had Rontu to talk to. When the canoe was finished and the pitch had dried, I wanted to find out how it went through the water and if the planks leaked. So we set off on a long voyage around the island. The voyage took all of one day, from dawn until night. There are many sea caves on the island of the Blue Dolphins, and some of them are large and go back far into the cliffs. One of these was near the headland where my house stood. The opening was narrow, not much wider than the canoe, but once we were inside, it spread out and was larger than my place on the headland. The walls were black and smooth, slanted far up over my head. The water was almost as black, except where light came through the opening. Here it was the gold color, and you could see fish swimming around. They were different from the fish on the reefs, having larger eyes and fins that drifted out from their body like kelp. This place opened into another, which was smaller and so dark I could see nothing. It was very silent in there, with no sound of the waves on the shore and only the lapping of the water against the rocky walls. I thought of the god Tumiayawit, who had become angry at Mukat and gone down into another world, and I wondered if it were not to such a place like this that he had gone. Far ahead was a spot of light no larger than my hand, so instead of turning back, which I felt like doing, I drifted toward it, around many turnings, and at last came into another room, much like the first. Along one side was a wide shelf of rock, which ran out to the sea through a narrow opening. The tide was full, and yet the shelf was out of the water. It was a fine place to hide a canoe, which could be lifted out and stored there where no one could find it. The ledge joined the cliff just below my house. All I needed was a trail down to the cave, and then the canoe would be close at hand. "We have made a great discovery," I said to Rontu. Rontu did not hear me. He was watching a devilfish just beyond the opening of the cave. This fish has a small head with eyes that bulge and many arms. All day Rontu had been barking at the cormorants, the gulls, and the seals, at everything that moved. Now he was quiet, watching the black thing in the water. I let the canoe drift along and knelt down out of sight until I could pick up my spear. The devilfish was in front of us, swimming slowly near the surface, moving all his arms at once. Large devilfish are dangerous if you are in the sea, for their arms are so long as a man, and they can quickly wrap them around you. They also have a big mouth and a sharp beak where their arms join their head. This was the largest one I had seen. I guess this is like a squid, maybe, huh? Since Rontu was standing in front of me, I could not put the canoe into a better position. I had to lean out to use the spear. As I did so, the devilfish saw my movement and let loose in the water a black cloud of liquid, which instantly hid him from view. I knew that the devilfish would not be in the center of this cloud, that he had left it behind. I therefore did not aim my spear at it, but I picked up the paddle and waited until he appeared. He was now twice the length of the canoe from me, and though I paddled fast, I could not overtake him. "Rontu," I said, for he was watching the black cloud in the water, "you have much to learn about the devilfish." Rontu did not look at me or bark. He put his head to one side and then the other, still puzzled. More so when the cloud disappeared and nothing was left except clear water. Devilfish is the best food in the seas. The flesh is white and tender and very sweet, but they are difficult to catch without a special kind of spear, which I now decided to make during the winter when I would have much time. I took the canoe to Coral Cave, not far from the cave, and I pulled it, Coral Cove, not far from the cave, and I pulled it up on the shore out of reach of the winter storms. There it would be safe until spring, when I would hide it in the cave that Rontu and I had found. It was easy to paddle and did not leak. I was very happy. Well, there she designed something and created it. She took an old canoe and made it shorter and lighter. But it sounds like she did a really good job. Doesn't leak, easy to paddle. She can move it around herself. She and Rontu can ride in it. Sounds perfect. She must have been very proud of herself. Chapter 17. Storms came early with rain, and between the rains, fierce winds struck the island and filled the air with sand. During this time, I made myself another dress, but most of the days I spent fashioning a spear to catch the giant devilfish. I had seen this spear made, as I had seen my father make bows and arrows, yet I knew little about it, no more than I had about the others. Still, I remembered how it looked and how it was used. From these memories, I made it, after many errors and many hours of work, sitting on the floor while Rontu slept nearby, and the storms beat upon the roof. 4 of the sea elephant teeth were left, and though I broke all except one, this I worked down to a head with a barbed point. And then I made a ring, and I fastened it to the end of the shaft, and into this ring fitted the head, which was tied to a long string made of braided sinew. When the spear was thrown and struck at the devilfish, the head came loose from the shaft. The shaft floated on the water, but the point barb was held by the string, which was tied to your wrist. The spear was especially good because it could be thrown from a distance. On the first day of spring, I went down to Coral Cove with my new spear. I knew it was spring because that morning at dawn, the sky was filled with flocks of darting birds. They were small and black and came only at this time of year. They came out of the south and stayed for 2 suns, hunting food in the ravines, and then flew off in one great flight toward the north. Ronto did not go with me to the beach because I had let him out of the fence and he had not returned. The wild dogs had been to the house many times that winter, and he had paid no heed to them. But the night before, after they had come and gone, he had stood by the fence. He stood and whined and walked up and down. It worried me to see him act so strangely, and when he refused to eat, I finally let him out. Now I pushed the canoe into the water and drifted toward the reef where the devilfish lived. The water was so clear it was like the air around me. Far down, the sea ferns moved as though through a breeze was blowing there, and among them swam the devilfish, trailing their long arms. It was good to be on the sea after the winter storms, with the new spear in my hand. But all the morning I hunted the giant devilfish. I kept thinking of Rontu. I should have been happy, and yet thinking of him I was not. Would he come back, I wondered? Or had he gone to live with the wild dogs? Would he be my enemy again? If he were my enemy, I knew that I could never kill him, now that he had been my friend. When the sun was high, I hid the canoe in the cave we had found, and once more it was the time the Aleuts might return, and with 2 small bass I had speared, though not the devilfish, I went up the cliff. I had planned to make a trail from the cave to my house, but I decided that it could be easily seen from a ship and by anyone standing on the headland. The climb was steep, and as I reached the top, I paused for breath. The morning was quiet, except for the noise of little birds flying from bush to bush and the cries of gulls who did not like these strangers. And then I heard the sound of dogs fighting. The sound came from far off, perhaps from the ravine, and taking my bow and arrow, I hurried in that direction. I went down the path which led to the spring. There were tracks of the wild dogs around the spring, and among them I saw the large ones of Rontu. The tracks led away through the ravine which winds to the sea, and again I heard the distant sound of fighting. I went slowly through the ravine because of my bow and arrow. At last I came to the place where it opens up into a meadow, right at the edge of a low sea cliff. Sometimes in the summer, a long time ago, my people had lived here. They gathered shellfish on the rocks and ate them here, leaving the shells, which after many summers had formed a mound. Over this, grass had grown, and a thick-leaved plant called a napan. On this mound, among the grasses and the plants, stood Rontu. He stood facing me with his back to the sea cliff. In front of him, in a half circle, were the wild dogs. At first I thought the pack had driven him there against the cliff and were getting ready to attack him. But I soon saw that 2 dogs stood out from the rest of the pack between it and Rontu, and that their muzzles were wet with blood. One of these dogs was the leader who had taken Rontu's place when he had come to live with me. The other one, which I spotted, I had never seen. The battle was between Rontu and these two dogs. The rest were there to fall upon whichever one was beaten. So great was the noise made by the pack that they had not heard me as I came through the bush, nor did they see me now as I stood at the edge of the meadow. They sat on their haunches and barked, with their eyes fixed on the other. But I was sure that Rontu knew that I was somewhere near, for he raised his head and smelled the air. The two dogs were trotting back and forth along the foot of the mound, watching Rontu. The fight had probably started at the spring, and they had stalked him to this place, where he had chosen to fight. The sea cliff was behind him, and they could not reach him from that direction, so they were trying to think of some other way. It would have been easier if one could have attacked him from the back and one from the front. Rontu did not move from where he stood on top of the mound. Now and again he lowered his head to lick a wound on his leg, but whenever he did, he always kept his eyes on the two dogs trotting up and down. I could have shot them, for they were within easy reach of my bow, or driven off the pack, yet I stood in the brush and watched. This was a battle between them and Rontu. If I stopped it, they would surely fight again, perhaps at some other place less favorable to him. Rontu again licked his wounds, and this time he did not watch the two dogs moving slowly past the mound. I thought it was a lure, and so it proved to be, for suddenly they ran toward him. They came from opposite sides of the mound, ears laid back, teeth bared. Rontu did not wait for the attack, but, leaping at the nearer one, turned his shoulder with his head, lowered, and caught the dog's foreleg. The pack was quiet. In the silence, I could hear the sound of the bone breaking, and the dog backed away on three legs. The spotted dog had reached the top of the mound. Whirling away from one he had crippled, Rontu faced him, but not in time to fend off the first heavy rush. Teeth slashed at his throat, and as he turned, his body struck him instead on the flank, and he went down. At that moment, where he lay there on the grass, with the dogs circling wary and the pack moving slowly toward him, without knowing that I did so, I fitted an arrow into the bow. A good distance separated Rontu from his attackers, and I could end the battle before he was wounded further or the pack fell upon him. Yet, as before, I did not send the arrow. The spotted dog paused and turned in his tracks and again leaped, this time from behind. Rontu was still lying in the grass with his paws under him, and I thought he did not see the other was upon him. But crouching there, he suddenly raised himself at the same time and fastened his teeth in the dog's throat. Together they rolled off the mound, yet Rontu did not let go. All the pack sat restless in the grass. In a short time, Rontu rose to his feet and left the spotted dog where it lay. He walked to the top of the mound and lifted his head and gave a long howl. I had never heard this sound before. It was the sound of many things that I did not understand. He trotted past me and up the ravine. When I got to the house, he was there waiting, and if he had not been away, as if he had never been away, or nothing had happened. In all the time he lived, Rontu never left again, and the wild dogs, which for some reason divided into two packs, and after that, never returned to the headland. Wow, Rontu did it. Fought two dogs at once and beat them both. Chapter 17 was good. Someday when you get a little older, you're going to read a really famous book called The Call of the Wild. It's by a guy named Jack London, and I think you should look forward to it. That last chapter reminded me a lot of Call of the Wild. It's about a pack of dogs looking for gold in Canada and Alaska. So look forward to that. You're going to like that book, The Call of the Wild. Well, here we go. How about one more chapter? Chapter 18. It's a shorty. Flowers were plentiful that spring because of the winter's heavy rains. The dunes were covered with mats of sandflowers, which are red and have tiny eyes that are sometimes pink and sometimes white. Yuccas grew tall among the rocks of the ravine. Their heads were clustered with curly globes, no larger than pebbles, and the color of the sun when it rises. Lupins grew from where the springs ran, from the sunny cliffs, and in crevices where no one would think anything could grow. Spring sprang the little red and yellow fountains of the kummel bush. Birds were plentiful too. There were many hummers which can stand still in the air and look like bits of polished stone, and have long tongues to sip honey with. There were blue jays, which are very quarrelsome birds, and black and white peckers that peck holes in the yucca stalks and the poles of my roof, even in the whalebones of the fence. Red-winged blackbirds also came out of the south, and flocks of crows, and a bird with a yellow body and a scarlet head, which I had never seen before. A pair of these birds made a nest in a stunted tree near my house. It was made from strings of the yucca bush and had a small opening at the top and hung down like a porch. The mother laid 2 speckled eggs, which she and her mate took turns sitting on. After the eggs hatched, I put shreds of abalone under the tree, and she fed her young. The young birds were not like their mother and father, being gray and very ugly, but anyway, I took them from the nest and put them in a small cage that I had made of reeds. So later in the spring, when all the birds except the crows left the island and flew off to the north, I had these 2 for friends. They soon grew beautiful feathers like those of their parents and began to make the same sound, which was reep reep. But it was soft and clear and much sweeter than the cries of the gulls or the crows or the talk of the pelicans, which sound like the quarreling of toothless old men. Before summer came, the cage was too small for my 2 birds, but instead of building a larger one, I cut the tips of their wings, 1 wing each, so they could not fly away, and let them loose in the house. By the time their wings had grown out, they had learned to take food from my hand. They would jump down from the roof and perch on my arm and beg, making their reep reep sound. When their wings began to feather out, I cut them again. This time I let them loose in the yard, where they hopped around, hunting food and perching on Rontu, who by now had gotten used to them. The next time they feathered out, I did not trim their wings, but they never flew farther than the ravine and would always come back at night to sleep, no matter how much they had eaten, to ask for food. One, because he was larger, I called Canoe. I named him after a young man I liked who had been killed by the Aleuts. The other I called Lure, which was a name I wished I had been called instead of Karana. During this time I was taming the birds, I made another skirt. This one I also made of yucca fibers, softened in the water and braided into twine. I made it just like the others, with folds running lengthwise. It was open on both sides and hung to my knees. The belt I made of sealskin, which could be tied into a knot. I also made a pair of sandals from sealskin for walking over the dunes when the sun was hot, or just to be dressed up when I wore my new skirt of yucca twine. Often I would put on the skirt and sandals and walk along the cliffs with Rontu. Sometimes I made a wreath of flowers and fastened it to my hair. After the Aleuts had killed our men at Coral Cove, all of the women of our tribe had singed their hair short, a sign of mourning. Mourning is when you're sad when someone has died. You're in mourning. I singed mine too, with a stick, but now it had grown long again and it came to my waist. I parted it and let it fall down my back when I wore a wreath. Then I made braids and fastened them with a long whalebone pin. I also made a wreath for Rontu's neck, which he did not like. Together we would walk along the cliff, looking at the sea, and though the white man's ship did not return that spring, it was a happy time. The air smelled of flowers, and birds sang everywhere. I need some water. Well, that's the end of chapter 18. So she's got 2 more pets, 2 more birds. She's pretty resourceful. You know, she's changed in a lot of ways, don't you think? She's become very self-sufficient. She does things for herself. And I think she's very brave, too. And very creative. She's changed in all sorts of ways. All right, well, you guys work on your packet. Work on writing about a thing maybe you designed or built that you're proud of, and finish up all the questions. And I'll see you next time for chapters 19, 20, and 21. Adios, my friends.